What I do in philosophy and teaching, I take to be a vocation. I really treat it that way, and I feel tremendously privileged to teach. And also, I was born into a very specific Christian atmosphere, Christian framework, very conservative Baptist, and have in various sorts of ways worked that through sort of am a recovering Baptist, I would say, all my whole life. And I've always been looking for ways to try to figure out how these two very important aspects of my life work together. And in many traditional ways, you might hear that they don't. As a philosophy, as a discipline, very cerebral, very intellectual, very logical, very evidence-based, whereas faith, frequently people will say, you believe things on faith that you don't have any evidence for, or faith is believing in something that you know isn't true, or something like that. And I've never thought that to be the case, but only in the last few years that I've really begun seriously to think about, okay, how do these pieces of me fit together? And so this book is a product of earlier work that I did on it. I've had a blog that I've been writing for the last 4 or 5 years in which I really investigate this. The blog is called Freelance Christianity, Philosophy, Faith, and the Real World. And I decided to make the title of the book the same thing. And so in my last sabbatical, which was last academic year, I decided I would see if I could put what I've been working on for the last 4 years into some sort of a book form. It's the first book I've ever had a chance to write, or anything that I've written other than my blog, that's a real reflection of me, both as an academic, both as a professional, and just as a normal person trying to figure out how to live a life of faith in a life of integrity to faith, as well as to my mind, my intellect, and all those sorts of things. Philosophy, I think incorrectly, is usually stereotypically described as an activity of the head exclusively, which doesn't engage emotion, intuition, your gut, that sort of thing. And faith is also incorrectly, stereotypically described as something that doesn't engage with the intellect. And the world that I grew up in, for instance, I tell my students frequently that the station wagons in the parking lot of the church that I grew up in had a bumper sticker that said, "God said it, I believe it, that settles it." These were things that you were not supposed to challenge. These were things you were not supposed to ask questions about. You just believed it and moved on. And I always found that very difficult to do, even as a little kid. I probably set a record for getting kicked out of Sunday school as a little kid for asking just simple questions of how can that possibly be true? How can you possibly, why are we supposed to believe that when it can't possibly be that way? And I always was thinking, I always was committed to believing that, okay, if I'm going to be a person of faith, it has to be something that not necessarily makes sense, but something that doesn't ignore important aspects of who I am. And same thing with philosophy from the other end. I'm not interested in teaching a discipline that essentially just turns people into heads, talking heads, and doesn't engage the whole person. And so from those two different angles, I thought there's got to be some place where these two things meet together. But stereotypically, and this isn't unique to the religious world I grew up in, stereotypically, people are not invited to question their faith, and people are, except in very specific smaller groups, smaller religious groups. But most people are taught this is if you're going to be a member of this group, if you're going to be part of this faith, this is what you believe, and move on. And questions and doubt really aren't a part of it. Questions and doubt are what philosophy is entirely about. And so bringing those two aspects together it's been interesting. I feel like I've prepared my whole life to write this book because I've never stopped thinking about this stuff. I tried to put it in the background at certain parts of, certain times of my life, but it never has been, there's never been a time that I can think of that I wasn't working on this in some sort of way. I kind of think of the book as a collage or a kaleidoscope where I'm taking different themes like faith or grace or incarnation, or I start with doubt. That's my first one. And then just it's various sorts of angles on each one of those things where I'm frequently writing, almost always writing from personal experience. I'm pretty convinced, or at least I'm in trouble if I'm wrong about this, I'm pretty convinced that God, whatever God is, has a sense of humor. So there's a lot of humor in the book because I find the best way to both teach and to think about things that are bigger than us is to realize that they're serious, but they're not deadly serious, and that humor and just being real is a very important thing to be doing, both in the classroom and just in terms of how do I engage with what's greater than me, and what does that mean to how do I live this sort of thing out. But all of the topics, as far as I'm concerned, are lived topics that really, for me, they have nothing to do with doctrine or dogma or really church itself or anything like that. These are human activities, human sorts of things that both the mind and every other part of me engage with. Somebody asked me that one time. The first time they asked me was about who are you writing your blog for, and then with the book they asked who are you writing the book for. And both times I was surprised to hear myself say, I guess I'm writing it for people like me. People like me, like as I just described, people who are trying to figure out a way to how do you live a life of integrity and purpose and meaning that doesn't ignore aspects of who you know you are, and take the different pieces together and have the different things that you believe and that you're committed to actually inform how you are in the world. This is absolutely intended for, and although I think academics, I talk with people here on campus all the time about what I write, and a lot of people read what I write and tell me that they frequently engage with it, but I don't have academics in mind. This is for a non-academic audience. I can imagine people who are committed to, who believe that there's something greater than us, but have a difficult time finding any kind of a framework or package within which to work that out, who have failed to find any traditional organized framework of religion that accommodates what they're looking for or the questions that they're asking. More or less people who are looking for permission to think outside the box, to look at familiar things in new sorts of ways. Well, one of my favorite authors, and I actually just introduced her to one of my classes yesterday. Simone Weil once wrote that, and this isn't a direct quote, but along the lines of that wherever you search for the truth, you don't need to worry that you're turning away from God or turning away, she says, from Christ, because whatever's greater than us is bigger than our searches. And so if you are actually searching for the truth and meaning, you'll always end up in a place that God encompasses, even if the details of it are radically different than what you might have expected. So I'm hoping that this will help empower people to go to places and to think about things and perhaps put into action things that they have been taught for a very long time, just they're out of bounds or shouldn't be thinking about. And I know in an academic setting like this is sometimes difficult, and this is why I speak to my students about this frequently, that you may have been raised in a framework or in a type of life, whether it's our many of our Catholic students are the type that I did, where you were just told, this is what you believe. This is what you should believe. And I'm hoping that this kind of a book will help people take ownership of what's been given to them, and not necessarily to change their beliefs, but for the first time to really take ownership of them and say, okay, this is mine because it means something to me. This is mine because I can see how it shapes my life going forward, makes me a better spouse, better parent, better son, daughter, friend, whatever. And it's meaningful not because I was told to believe it, not because I'm supposed to believe it, but because it works. And that, for me, there's nothing in this book that I haven't struggled with very, very hard in many sorts of ways, and very little of it that I've come out on the other end to a finished product. It's very much an invitation to the process rather than the end, I think. The idea, or beginning to write as I do for the blog, started in my sabbatical in 2009. And I was writing essays that just seemed to be expressive of things that I had sort of laid dormant, but I really needed to work on for a very long time. And so I really worked on finding my voice. And when I realized what I was doing, it was just really taking traditional sorts of ideas that had sort of been sitting in me for a very long time and just beginning to see how far can I press these? How far can this envelope be pushed without breaking? I often tell my students that my job is I think of every class as being like a rubber band, and my job is to stretch them, see how far I can stretch them before they break. And that's what I was doing with these ideas. And I realized that as I did it, every one of them is framed, was shaped within a very traditional religious tradition, Christianity for me. But every one of them was morphing into something that was kind of recognizable, but was very different than the traditional ways of thinking. So when I decided I was going to do a blog, which now 5 years ago almost, when I thought about the title, I thought, okay, I had two possibilities. It was either going to be Christian agnosticism or freelance Christianity. And my wife strongly advised me not to do Christian agnosticism. She said, nobody's going to read that. And she probably was right. So freelance Christianity just means that I think a living faith is flexible enough to be okay if it doesn't fit with any traditional model. Freelance, that aspect of it just simply means being willing to take it outside of the box and see where it might work, where it might fit. And the subtitle of it, Philosophy, Faith, and the Real World, is simply as I've been describing, that's how do I take these two things and make them kind of the energy that I approach my day with.